Three headlines: a possible agreement involving one of the world's most important energy corridors, European rivers running too low to support normal shipping and power production, and U.S. active duty military personnel facing the detention or deportation of their own family members. At first, these may appear to be three unrelated stories. One is about war and energy, one is about climate and infrastructure, one is about immigration and U.S. military families. But when we examine them through the lens of human capacity, they reveal the same underlying problem. The demands being placed on people and systems are increasing, while the margin available to absorb these demands is disappearing. Welcome to the inaugural Human Capacity SITREP. SITREP is short for Situation Report. This is where we examine the events shaping our world and ask a question that rarely makes it into the headline. What human capacity challenge is beneath this story? This is not a partisan news recap. It is not a prediction show, and it is not an attempt to reduce complex political, economic, or humanitarian events to workplace talking points. The purpose is to recognize that current events outside the organization can enter through the supply chains, operating costs, public policy, employee households, family systems, leadership decisions, and the physical and emotional conditions under which people are expected to perform. In our premiere episode, I introduced human capacity as the cognitive, emotional, physical, relational, professional, behavioral, and cognitive resources people draw upon to meet the demands of life and work. The human capacity advantage is created when organizations protect, develop, and align those resources with the demands people are being asked to carry. Today, we are going to apply the framework to three headlines. For each story, we will ask 5 questions. What is happening? What new demand does it create? Whose capacity is absorbing that demand? Which dimensions of human capacity are affected? And what would responsible capacity stewardship require? Let's begin. Our first headline takes us to the Strait of Hormuz. As of the time of this recording, the Associated Press is reporting that Iran and Oman have made progress towards an agreement involving the reopening and management of shipping routes through the Strait of Hormuz. The precise terms remain contested, and the larger military and diplomatic situation continues to change. Why does this matter? Because the Strait of Hormuz is not simply a distant body of water. Before the current disruption, approximately 1/5 of the world's traded oil and natural gas passed through this corridor. When access becomes uncertain, the consequences move quickly. They move through fuel prices, they move through shipping costs, they move through manufacturing, schedules, airline expenses, food distribution, transportation systems, government budgets, and household finances. We are already feeling that in the United States and throughout the world. That brings us to our first human capacity question. What demand does this story create? It creates the demand to make consequential decisions under conditions that leaders do not control and cannot predict with confidence. Organizations must make decisions about pricing, travel, procurement, staffing, inventory, and business continuity without knowing how long the disruption will last or whether diplomatic progress will hold. That is a direct demand on cognitive capacity. Leaders must process incomplete and sometimes contradictory information while distinguishing between temporary volatility and lasting change in operating conditions. It is also a demand on adaptive capacity. Organizations may need to change suppliers, reroute transportation, modify budgets, delay investments, or prepare for additional cost increases. It affects professional capacity because operations, finance, procurement, logistics, and human resources teams must respond simultaneously. It eventually reaches physical capacity when employees are expected to absorb higher commuting costs, increased food prices, disrupted travel, or longer and less predictable workdays. That is how a geopolitical event crosses the threshold of the workplace. It does not arrive labeled as a human capacity problem. It arrives as a budget problem, a scheduling problem, a supply problem, an attendance problem, or an employee who can no longer afford the same commute 5 days a week. At that point, leaders may need to reevaluate whether requiring 5 days in the workplace still makes operational and human sense. For some roles, returning to hybrid or remote work may not simply be an employee benefit. Under changed economic conditions, it may be a responsible capacity, retention, and business continuity decision. That is why leaders must ask, where is our organization dependent on a stable condition that we do not actually control? That condition could be energy availability. It could be fuel prices. It could be one supplier, one port, one transportation route, or one region of the world. The leadership responsibility is not to predict every possible geopolitical outcome. It is to identify where the organization lacks margin and determine who will be expected to absorb the consequences if conditions change. If every disruption is managed by asking employees to work longer, respond faster, travel more, or accomplish the same objective with fewer resources, the organization is not demonstrating resilience. It is transferring its risk to its people. Responsible capacity stewardship requires scenario planning, clear communication, and explicit decisions about what the organization will stop, delay, or modify if operating conditions worsen. The question is not only how do we protect productivity, the question is how do we protect the people upon whom the productivity depends. Our second headline comes from Europe, where extreme heat and prolonged drought are disrupting daily life, public infrastructure, energy production, and commercial transportation. The Associated Press reports that temperatures have exceeded 40 degrees Celsius or 104 degrees Fahrenheit in parts of Europe. Italy placed its major cities under red heat alerts, while countries across the region dealt with fires, transportation problems, strained public services, and reduced power production. The Wall Street Journal has also reported that critically low river levels are disrupting shipping and industrial operations along waterways such as the Danube and the Rhine. Ships cannot carry their normal loads. Some power facilities have had difficulty accessing sufficient water. Companies are reducing production and struggling to move necessary materials. The visible story is about extreme weather. The deeper human capacity story is about both physical infrastructure and human bodies are being asked to operate under conditions for which they are not adequately designed. Consider the number of systems that may be affected at once: power generation, public transportation, shipping, manufacturing, healthcare, agriculture, tourism, schools, emergency services, and the workers responsible for maintaining each of them. When a transportation system becomes unreliable, an employee must find another way to work. When a building cannot remain cool, the people inside it absorb the physical strain. When river transportation slows, supply chain teams absorb the scheduling and inventory pressure. When production falls behind, managers and workers are asked to recover the lost output. Once again, people become the buffer between rising demands and declining system reliability. The first affected dimension is physical capacity. Extreme heat increases fatigue, dehydration, sleep disruption, cardiovascular strain, and the time needed for recovery. A person may still arrive at work and appear present while having substantially less physical and cognitive capacity available. This is important because attendance and capacity are not the same thing. Someone can be at work without being fully able to perform the work safely or effectively. Cognitive capacity is also affected. Heat and physical exhaustion can reduce concentration and judgment, reactive time, and decision quality. Professional capacity is affected when organizations cannot rely on normal transportation, energy, staffing, or production schedules. Adaptive capacity is tested when conditions exceed the assumptions embedded in existing continuity plans. This leads to the leadership question beneath the headline. Are our continuity plans designed only for ordinary disruptions, or can they function when several systems fail at the same time? Many organizations have a plan for a power interruption. They may have another plan for severe weather. They may have policies addressing employee illness, transportation delays, or supply shortages. But what happens when extreme heat affects power, transportation, employee health, supply chains, and community services simultaneously? That is not a single disruption. It is a compound capacity event. Responsible leadership in that environment requires more than encouraging employees to remain resilient. It may require changing shifts, reducing exposure, altering performance expectations, expanding recovery time, modifying travel, creating redundancy, and deciding what work can be delayed. There is an important principle here. When operating conditions change, capacity expectations must also change. If an organization continues demanding normal performance under abnormal conditions, the differences don't just disappear. Someone absorbs it, and usually it is the employee. And when employees are repeatedly expected to compensate for inadequate infrastructure or insufficient planning, what leaders call resilience can become institutionalized overextension. All right. Our third headline brings us to the United States. An Associated Press investigation found that more than 50 parents and spouses of U.S. active duty military personnel have been detained under current immigration enforcement practices. Some have reportedly been deported. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security maintains that having a family member in the military does not automatically confer legal status or prevent immigration enforcement. Immigration policy is politically charged, and people hold sharply different views regarding enforcement, legal status, national security, and fairness. The human capacity lens does not require us to pretend those disagreements do not exist. It asks us to examine an additional question. What are the operational and human consequences when a person responsible for a demanding national mission is simultaneously facing a threat to the stability of their family? Imagine being expected to deploy, maintain military readiness, make high stakes decisions, or maintain focus, or go back. What are the operational and human consequences when a person responsible for a demanding national mission is simultaneously facing a threat to the stability of their family? Imagine being expected to deploy, maintain military readiness, make high stakes decisions, or remain focused on a mission while a spouse or parent is detained or may be removed from the country. The demand does not remain at home simply because the service member reports for duty. It enters the workplace through divided attention. It enters through emergency leave. It enters through childcare and caregiving. It enters through fear legal appointments, financial pressure, and the loss of trust. This is a demand on emotional capacity because fear and uncertainty consume resources. It is a demand on relational capacity because the family system that supports the service member may be destabilized. It is a demand on cognitive capacity because concentration becomes more difficult when a loved one's safety or future is uncertain. And it becomes a professional capacity issue when the service member must miss training, delay deployment, seek emergency assistance, or attempt to perform while managing a family crisis. This is where policy and operational reality meet. A government may have the legal authority to enforce a policy. An organization may have the authority to implement a rule. A leader may have the authority to make a decision. But authority does not eliminate consequences. Responsible leadership requires examining what a policy asks people to carry and whether that burden undermines the mission the policy is supposed to support. And this exposes a significant gap in leadership development. Most leadership development programs outside military settings will never touch a scenario like this. They may teach communication, delegation, conflict resolution, and change management. They will not show you how to lead when an employee is afraid that a spouse or parent may be detained or deported while the employee is still expected to carry out that mission. Yet this is not a hypothetical case study. This is the reality facing leaders, and leaders will not magically know what to do simply because they hold a title. I saw this during the COVID-19 pandemic. Leaders were suddenly expected to navigate grief, fear, caregiving, breakdowns, health risk, remote work, staffing crisis, and business continuity, often without adequate preparation. A leadership title did not automatically confer the skills required for that moment. Leaders had to learn in real time, and the consequences of their readiness or lack of it were felt by the people they led. We should not repeat that mistake by treating today's realities as too political or too personal or too uncomfortable for leadership development. If an issue affects an employee's ability to think, make decisions, care for their family, feel safe, or carry out the mission, then it belongs in the conversation about leadership. The principle extends beyond the military. Employees do not stop being parents, spouses, caregivers, patients, community members, or human beings when they begin their workday. Their professional capacity is connected to the stability of the systems around them. When those systems are disrupted, their available capacity changes. That does not mean organizations can solve every family or social problem. That's not what I'm saying. It means leaders should not build operating models that depend upon employees having no problems outside of work. The relevant leadership question is, what happens to mission readiness when institutional expectations and employees' lived realities come into direct conflict? And the follow-up question is, what support, flexibility, information, or protection would help preserve the person's ability to continue carrying the mission? Now let's put the three stories together. War and uncertainty place pressure on global energy and supply systems. Extreme heat and drought place pressure on infrastructure, transportation, production, and the human body. Immigration enforcement places pressure on U.S. military families and potentially on the readiness of the people responsible for national defense. The common pattern is this: external demands are rising, institutional buffers are thinning, and the people closest to the mission are being asked to absorb the difference. Energy markets absorb geopolitical instability. Workers and communities absorb infrastructure instability. Military families absorb policy instability. This is how systems reveal that they are running out of margin. They rarely make an announcement. Instead, we see delays, shortages, mistakes, turnover, interrupted operations, disengagement, family crises, health consequences, and people who are doing everything they can to keep a system functioning after the system has exceeded its own capacity. That is why human capacity cannot be treated as a soft issue. It is an operating condition. It determines how much pressure people and institutions can absorb, how effectively they can adapt, and how long they can sustain performance before something begins to fail. Here is this week's capacity practice. Select 3 headlines. They do not have to be the 3 we discussed today, or they can be the 3 we discussed, but customize the solutions to your industry or your organization. Bring your team in and make it a party. For each headline, ask what is happening, what new demand does this event create, whose capacity is absorbing that demand, which dimensions of human capacity are affected? If you don't remember, feel free to listen to episode 1 to refresh your memory. And what would responsible capacity stewardship require? Do not begin by asking who is right. You may eventually need to make that judgment, particularly if you are responsible for setting policy or making a decision. But begin by identifying who is carrying the demand. Then determine whether those people have the resources, protection, recovery, and support required to carry it sustainably. The headlines tell us what happened. The human capacity lens helps us understand what the event is asking people to carry. And once we can see that clearly, we can make better decisions about leadership, policy, work, and the systems we are building for what comes next. That is why this week matters. And that's it. If today's conversation resonated with you, subscribe and share this episode with someone who would benefit from it. You can continue the conversation with me and my team at thenightingalefirm.com. New episodes of the Human Capacity Advantage podcast are released every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. On Monday, the Monday Morning Capacity Check prepares you to approach the week with greater awareness and intention. On Wednesday, our main classroom episode develops your understanding of the research, workplace realities, and leadership practices in the Human Capacity Advantage system. And on Friday, the Human Capacity SITREP teaches you to look beneath the headlines, recognize the capacity challenges shaping our world, and consider what responsible leadership requires. Monday prepares you, Wednesday develops you, and Friday teaches you to see the world differently. Between now and our next class, pay attention to the world around you. Notice where human capacity is being strengthened, where it is being depleted, and where you may never have thought to look before. I'm Dr. Kim Hyers. Thank you for joining me. Until next time, class dismissed.